Awesome. So Mr. Hartig serves as a visiting scholar at the University of Windsor's Great Lakes Institute for Environmental Research. He's on the board of directors at the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy, which was our big interest of having him here today. And also he's got a lot of other awards under his belt. He's served as a refuge manager for the Detroit River International Wildlife Refuge, has numerous awards, numerous publications, potentially some things that he'll share with us that we might want to look up and read about later if we don't get to it during today's presentations. And he's going to give us a little bit of an overview. Let me know if I've missed anything that we should know in advance.
No. Well, thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. And can you hear me, first of all?
I can. We're going to mute everybody else for the meantime.
Okay. So I'm going to just get this going now.
And just for the folks participating on Zoom, if you have a question, please type it in the chat. And then we'll come back around to everybody and unmute you as we get to that point.
Okay. Wonderful. Great to be with you. I'm a big fan of what you've done in Muskegon Lake, and Kathy and I have been friends for many decades working on this together. And so Detroit is just a wonderful example of rediscovering the waterfront. You know, landscape architects like to talk about the importance of front porches on houses. You know, if you have big front porches on houses, your neighbors stop by and have a cup of coffee. You've got greater interaction with people in your neighborhood. There's greater safety. It leads to a stronger community fabric. And so I like to talk about this as creating a new waterfront porch in Detroit. This is just going to be very short. I've got only 5 slides, but then that's going to open it up for lots of discussion and any questions you may have. But just like Muskegon Lake had lots of issues because of what was there, from lumber to Arsenal of Democracy, Detroit had the similar things. This is a photo from the 1960s, and that's the Detroit River on the right-hand side, and that's the Rouge River coming in on the left-hand side, and you can actually see some oil coming in there. And can you imagine the Federal Water Pollution Control Administration, which was the predecessor of US EPA, said that identified back in the 70s as Detroit River being one of the most polluted areas in the United States. So we, like Muskegon Lake, have seen a revival. You know, we've seen a cleanup with of the Detroit River, and with the cleanup of the river and interest in, you know, one of the first observations for so many Detroiters and people living downstream of Detroit on the Detroit River was that they had so limited public access to the river. So this is a photo taken, about 22 years ago from the Renaissance Center, looking upriver towards Lake St. Clair and Belle Isle. And it's stark. This is what our waterfront was. You can see the material storage piles. You can see gravel, 21AA, and you know, piles of limestone. And to make cement, you see 3 sets of cement silos. Then you see dilapidated and abandoned buildings, and you see surface parking lots. This was the waterfront, and no wonder people were disconnected from the Detroit River. They had no public access. So with the cleanup of the river and interest in having greenways that not only connect to water resources, but to each other, neighborhoods, and to points of interest, like whether they are the cultural center or whatever, they envisioned a Detroit Riverwalk. And it started with an idea. They had a blue ribbon committee that was established to re-envision the waterfront. What should it be for future generations? And so we envisioned this 5.5-mile greenway trail called the Detroit Riverwalk. And now we are just finishing our 21st year on this project. So in the first 10 years alone, they invested $140 million to build just the first portions of the Riverwalk. And they did an economic benefits study of what was the return on that investment. And the return on it was over $1 billion of private and public sector investment. And here's a quote from the president of the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy: "Without early focus on cleaning up the river and improving water quality, this transformation of the water's edge would not have been possible." We stand today with, just think of all the tags, the perceptions of Detroit. Well, Detroit was the automobile capital of the United States. It still is. It was, it had a polluted river in the Rust Belt. It was the arsenal of democracy, the heart of the arsenal of democracy, and all the pollution that came with that. And today we stand with as the #1 Riverwalk in the United States, as identified by USA Today, 3 years in a row. So just an amazing transformation. And Kathy asked me to think a little bit about some of the lessons learned. And I'm just going to go through these as just a starting point for our discussion. And then we can, talk together about some of these or go off in a different direction. But, first thing is to create a vision that can be carried in the hearts and minds of people. Think about it. We want to create a new waterfront porch. We want a beautiful, exciting, accessible, world-class gathering place for all. So that was really important in getting that common vision that everyone can be talking about, to have a little buzz about this vision. That's where we're going with this. Then we needed a well-respected champion to head this up. And Matt Cullen was working with General Motors at the time, and he was head of worldwide real estate. So he had purchased the Renaissance Center from Ford Motor Company to become the global world headquarters of GM. And it was a fortress. It had massive concrete walls around it. It was built at a time where you didn't want people to get in. You wanted to keep people out. And so his vision was, we need to do something to open this up and make it connected to people. And so they built a 5-story glass atrium called the Winter Garden as a welcoming place. It was facing the Detroit River. The historical front door of the Renaissance Center was facing away from the river, like so many places, like Muskegon Lake and other places. So they turned that around and created a GM promenade and this Winter Garden. And that was the first segment of the Detroit Riverwalk. So having somebody who can be a champion for you, who can open doors, that is, brings people together to do this. A well-respected champion is an important lesson learned. And then you want to get everyone kind of working together. You mentioned a public-private partnership. You don't want this to just to be seen as local government or regional government. You want it to be seen as something broader than that, where that residents, businesses, even industries are going to benefit. So ensure broad support from key stakeholder groups. You need a core delivery team that focuses on outcomes. Okay, if you want to improve public access to Muskegon Lake, where is the low-hanging fruit? What could you do? That is an initial outcome. You want to do that. You want to improve public access and protect it in perpetuity, and then celebrate that. So that you need a core delivery team that's going to be focused on outcomes and success. Then, of course, it's very common sense, but we can't say it enough. When you do some of these projects, you don't want to do it just as your community. You want to get as many stakeholder groups bought into it. So as you do your inventory of existing public access to Muskegon Lake, and then where could we initially make improvements? What is it going to take? Are there some brownfield issues? Are we going to have to go through cleanup? Do we want to soften the shoreline? What are the things we want to do? So ensure co-production of knowledge and co-innovation of solutions. So the new knowledge is owned by everyone, and the solutions are going to be owned by all people. And of course, from our perspective, Detroit was particularly challenged. Detroit, as you probably know, was the largest city in the United States to go through bankruptcy. Detroit fought with the federal government, the state government, the county government, the suburbs. So they had this long-standing adversarial relationships with a lot of people, and we had to change that. We had to truly build back trust, and we had to reestablish some relationships built on trust, because in the end, it's all about relationships and your relationships with people. And that saying up front in the process. So 21 years ago, we said, we don't have all the answers. We need to go through this together and cooperatively learn our way out of these problems and improve public access to the Detroit River. Then they adopted early on a very strategic approach to community engagement. It took a lot longer. The number of meetings, the number of design charrettes, going down to neighborhood groups, block clubs, and churches to talk to them about what we collectively would like to see for a Detroit Riverwalk. The number of meetings, the time that took was long, but it's paid huge benefits in terms of getting support for the project and building a record of success. Then another lesson would be evoke a sense of place, placemaking. What is it going to take for people to come back year after year or season after season to the shores of Muskegon Lake in certain places? What makes that place unique and memorable? You want people to come down and make new memories there so they can talk about it throughout their lifetime and pass those memories on to future generations as well. Money is critical to this kind of project, and Muskegon Lake and Detroit River are no different. So you need a collaborative approach to funding. At the beginning of this project, the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, that acronym, and that's this slide, surveyed all the communities along the Detroit River and in the watershed and said, what is stopping you from building greenways. And surprisingly, this is now 22 years ago, they all said the same thing. Well, you don't realize that in austerity budgets, the first thing to get cut is recreation. That we are not a high priority in community budgets. And so the community foundation said, well, what would happen if we went out and raised that money and help you make this go? And they all said that would be amazing. So the community foundation went out through a public-private partnership, went to the foundations and went to the businesses, big businesses in Detroit, and said, we want to start with an initial investment of $25 million. They did it in 1 year. They raised that. And those dollars would be given away to communities to make the match on greenways grants and realize it. So that 25 million with additional funding in future years grew to $33 million, leveraged another $100 million to build greenways throughout the watershed in Southeast Michigan. That's the first such fund in the United States. And that was really innovative at the time and still is. In engaging with industries, big names in Detroit, big foundations in Detroit, the Erb Family Foundation, the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, Kellogg and Mott, and they all had roots in Detroit. So those, and then GM, Ford, Chrysler, and everything else. So a collaborative approach to funding, and then of course, like you've done in Muskegon Lake, you can never do enough to measure benefits. Your work on economic benefits, based on the Grand Valley State University study, that is so critical to show. Funders like to know, what are we going to get in return? What's going to be leveraged by this? And then, of course, celebrating successes, because it's going to be a long-term process. So it is really amazing to see where we are with the Riverwalk. One of the things they said is, we don't just want a 6-mile river walk on the Detroit River. What about all those neighborhoods inland? How do we make sure that there are benefits realized by underserved neighborhoods inland? And so the first response to that feedback from these neighborhood groups was the DeQuinder Cut, which was a below grade rail line that went from the Detroit River up to Eastern Market, the largest open air market in the United States. And from there, it went over to Midtown, the Cultural Center, if you know where the DIA is, and Wayne State University, and the New Center area. So that all became connected by greenway trails, so that people could get on a bicycle or walk all the way to the waterfront and enjoy the Detroit Riverwalk. The second one was the Dennis Archer Greenway, another one that goes into a underserved neighborhood and make sure they can come out of their homes and their apartments and get on this trail, go to the Detroit Riverwalk and enjoy it. The third one is called the Southwest Greenway, which goes to Mexican Town in Southwest Detroit. It is one of the most well-known environmental justice areas in Michigan. And so we have a greenway trail that goes up there. It stops at the Central train station that opened a few weeks ago, one of the iconic train stations in Detroit, and goes over to Mexican Town. So all those people then can also benefit from the Detroit Riverwalk by coming down the Greenway Trail. So it is a amazing thing. The Riverfront Conservancy is also thinking bigger. So how does this, the 6 miles of waterfront, these connectors connect to something bigger? How do we make sure that we are not thinking too narrow. And so we are part of the Iron Bell Trail. You've probably heard of that in Michigan. It goes from Ironwood, Michigan down to Belle Isle in Detroit. So these are going to be extensions of the Iron Bell Trail. We've also worked on something called the Great Lakes Way, which is an interconnected set of greenways and water trails from Port Huron, Michigan on Lake Huron, down the St. Clair River, around Lake St. Clair, down the Detroit River, and all the way to Toledo, Ohio. And then to go even bigger and better, one of the most amazing new bridges in North America is under construction called the Gordie Howe International Bridge. And we advocated for 6 years to get a dedicated bicycle and pedestrian lane on that bridge. So now the Riverwalk will be connected to Joe Louis Greenway. They'll go to the Gordie Howe International Bridge. We'll cross over to Canada. And when you land in Canada, you will be in the second national urban park in Canada called Ojibwe National Urban Park. And for people in Canada, they come across, and it's a short bike ride to Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Centennial Park, a new park being funded by the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, an $80 million park, sort of like, think about it, Disney for people in Detroit who will never go to Disney World or Disneyland. You know what I mean? It's going to be so out of the box, but think of the experiences we'll be able to offer binational, cross-border trail tourism. The Underground Railroad celebrated in 2 countries by bicycle. First Nations celebrated in 2 countries, by bicycle. Conservation, environmental education, the list can go on and on and on. So we're really excited. It doesn't happen in a few short years, but just like you've done in Muskegon Lake and all the investment you've made to clean up that lake, the great benefits are yet to come. So with that, I'll stop there and I'll be happy to answer questions, but we could enter into a discussion on any topic you want, okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much for all of that. I'm going to ask a couple quick questions and then, we can certainly round robin it. So one of the reasons that we asked you to join us was not only because the Riverwalk itself is a wonderful example of, folks being able to access the waterfront, but because there's this entity that you've created, this conservation entity focused specifically on the Riverwalk. And as you mentioned, ensuring that into perpetuity. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. When we started this, we said, there was no model near us. And we, from a distance, had been watching what Toronto was doing. And they started out and they said, if we're ever going to clean up Toronto Harbor, the largest city in Canada, if we're ever going to do that, people can't be disconnected from the waterfront. And so they started early on with creating something called the Waterfront Regeneration Trust, which is trying to reconnect people with Lake Ontario, the waterfront, give them experiences, all the things that we're trying to do on the Detroit Riverwalk. So we took a group of people from Detroit and we flew up there and we spent 3 days in a deep dive on how they set up the Waterfront Regeneration Trust, how it got funded, what was its mandate, what are the principles that guide decision making. And so in many respects, the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy is modeled after that. And some of the lessons learned are very similar for Toronto at that as well. So I guess periodically, we do benchmarking. We have both citizens and staff of the Riverfront Conservancy and board members who visit different places, in the United States to look at what they're doing and how are they doing it? What are their best practices? So we can continue to be a learning organization.
Do you make that generally publicly available, the continued research that you do? And in general, just kind of the details of creating the conservancy? Is that you documented in detail somewhere that we can reference?
Yeah, there's lots of I did a book on it called Waterfront Porch that
Okay.
Kathy knows about, and I'll be happy to send you a copy of that if you'd like. And I can, after this, I will send a little list to maybe Kathy, if that's acceptable to you, a couple of links where you can get some quick, easy references on this with more information, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anything you want to share, please do.
Okay.
I'd
Um,
like to say one thing. You
go
know,
ahead.
you talked about the well-respected champion, Matt Cullen, and he was working for an industry at the time. And then there must have been some thought given to, well, we need a central coordinated approach to continue this on. And that's probably where the Conservancy was born at that point somehow. I'm thinking about where Detroit was and also where Toronto was when they started this effort compared to Muskegon, because Muskegon did an awful lot of cleanup and restoration before really getting, I think, our community on the same page toward public access. I feel like we should have been working a little bit more on the public access pieces earlier when we still had a lot of cleanup work to do. And so I feel like we feel like we're catching up a lot now and trying to save what we know we have before it gets sold or redeveloped or something. And now we're faced with this intensive redevelopment pressure rather than a slow, oh, the economy was bad in 2008. It would have been easier then, right?
Right.
You know, so yeah.
Yes. So, but you know, in terms of, life after delisting, you need to pay attention to that. Kathy knows this. I think the value of having, for the last 21 years, Detroit Riverfront Conservancy at the table is that I've given you a good news stories. There's lots of little difficult challenges stuck in. I'm going to give you one example of a major dogfight we had. And so there's a casino on the Detroit River in downtown Windsor. And you can imagine with a population of over 5 million people in Metro Detroit, and a lot of them were going to gamble in Windsor. So that was a very lucrative operation. And so in our learning process, they said there's going to be 3 casinos in Detroit, and they've already got the money in place, and they all wanted waterfront land where the Detroit Riverwalk is. And we said, we're going to fight you on this. So in there, we went over and did a study of the Windsor Casino. And they said, of all the people that go to the Windsor Casino, how many of them go out and walk on the waterfront? How much spin-off economic benefits? I mean, do restaurants in the area and shops benefit? The vast, vast majority of all those gamblers stay in the casino. They stay in the hotel. They eat in the hotel. They gamble, and then they go home. There was no spin-off economic benefits or other benefits. So restaurants were closing, shops were closing because of the casino. So based on that, we took that argument and went into this dogfight and said, it does not make sense for you to be given the best land in Detroit. You need to go inland, and you can have your casino, but you will still make your money, but we will still have the waterfront for all. And that was a key dogfight that we won. And today everyone says, oh my goodness, thank heavens we fought that battle,
Yeah, I think we're aware of such potential battles, but as you mentioned, sometimes placing things farther inland, now folks can then also go to the waterfront separately, right? They can do both of those things without taking up that prime property just for a building to sit on. So certainly we've encountered that. So the timeline, when did you first get involved with this, and what would you say was from the beginning to the first kind of minimum viable product, or the first, we have a river walk to speak of? What did that timeline look like?
yeah, so I got involved. They started, Kathy knows this. I was back in my career. After I left the International Joint Commission, I became, they identified 14 American heritage rivers throughout the United States, and I became a river navigator for Detroit, which was one of the 14 American heritage rivers. It would be really cool if a river navigator had a boat and cruised up and down, but that was not, you don't navigate a river, you navigate your
Paperwork.
paperwork to uh, improve public access, to promote sustainable development, to restore habitats, to celebrate history and culture. So while I was in that job, the mayor at the time asked if I would join this Blue Ribbon Committee, which was a couple of years before the Riverfront Conservancy was created. And I've been on it ever since, you know. So, and it's really amazing the number of people on the board of the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy that have been on for 20 years. It's over half, you know. It's kind of amazing that there's that level, just like Muskegon Lake, all of you, you know, the commitment you have too. So that was really important, you know.
Has there been any example of a community outside of Detroit who's taken these lessons and you've already seen them in play that you think is a good example?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. There's others, you know, like Grand Rapids has come a number of times to visit and talk about their waterfront on the Grand River with us. And, you know, what did you do? Why did you do this? Including softening the shoreline. You know, we got this big working river that supports industry and commerce. We have lots of concrete breakwater and steel sheet piling, provides no habitat for fish and wildlife. But how can we strategically and incrementally improve habitat of the river? They're looking at that. There's been exchanges between Buffalo, New York, and Detroit. Also Milwaukee. We've had some exchanges with Milwaukee and Toronto and Hamilton, Ontario, same kinds of things. And we're all at different points of the process, but that kind of learning together, you know, is really good, benefiting from what has worked in their situation and how can we accelerate learning so we don't make the same mistakes and accelerate the process, you know.
Got one more. What do you think folks mostly use the Riverwalk for in the winter? Is there kind of a certain draw that brings people to the water in the winter?
Yeah, so we have different, you know, the Riverwalk is often described as a necklace. So the beads of the necklace are like parks, like Mount Elliott Park and Valade Park and, you know, Milliken State Park. And then the strands of the necklace are the Greenway trails. And so there is programming going on, winter programming. They've created a hill at Valade Park, and there's sledding, and they have hot chocolate, and they've got the outdoor fire pits. And so they do lots of free family activities in the winter time to bring people down to the Riverwalk. And it's cold, just like Muskegon Lake, right? I mean, it's cold. We also, you know, Detroit River is the intersection of the Atlantic and Mississippi flyways. So you got all these birds and waterfowl that come down on an annual migration, and they stop and rest and feed along the Detroit River. And so we get 300,000 ducks at a time that stop, you know. So we've set up a one park, Gabriel Richard Park, and did a special entry-level birding spot with free spotting scopes, and working with the former Detroit Audubon, which is called Detroit Bird City now. They changed their name to program that even in the winter, because you get to see these waterfowl that you won't get to see in the spring, summer, and fall, you know. So yes, there is winter programming that goes on to bring people to the waterfront 4 seasons a year.
Perfect. Thank you so much for all of that. I know we have other folks in the room.
I have
and
one
that's-
more thing. One thing
Go
I
ahead.
wanted to do, give one thought in here, is that capacity is always an issue. We got low capacity initially. How are we going to build capacity? What could we do? And, we have the Metro Parks. It's called Huron Clinton Metropolitan Authority. So, 60 years ago, they create these metro parks. They're all in the suburbs, and yet tax dollars from all the cities, including Detroit, go to maintaining these. They had no presence in the city. And we've engaged them for a long time saying, we would like you to come back to the city and to be part of this. And your forte is programming, education, outdoor recreation. So we've signed an MOU with them where they're bringing their staff into the city to program at key places along the Detroit Riverwalk, all for free, right? All for free for people, so that we are truly welcoming to all. And so, yeah, that's been a really good strategic partnership, doing similar things with the Detroit Zoo and Michigan DNR. There was no state park in Detroit and until Milliken State Park came along. And now, of course, they've transferred over on a 99-year lease, Belle Isle, and that's technically a state park as well. So the state, that's a way of building capacity to do this. And if we think of Belle Isle and the Detroit River as the crown jewel of not only the Detroit's park system, but it's the pendant that sits at the end of the necklace of parks and greenway trails of the Detroit Riverwalk.
Absolutely. So Kathy asked if we could do some quick intros,
Okay.
just so maybe you understand kind of who's all in the room. And so we can do that real quick. And then I think, as I mentioned, folks have some inputs or questions. My name is Leah Willett-Leroy. I'm chairing this committee. I grew up in Metro Detroit, and my dad used to work downtown Detroit at the Chamber of Commerce for about 10 years. So I've really seen that
So
change.
you know it. Wow, you know it. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've got our formidable mayor with us.
Ken Johnson, Mayor of the magnificent city of Muskegon and member of the Muskegon Lake Watershed Partnership.
Great.
George Dornbos. Good.
And Joanne, and we're renters in downtown Muskegon and on the waterfront, a lot of walking and in that area a lot.
Roger Kelly, a resident of Muskegon.
I'm Dennis Kirksey. I'm chair of the Watershed Partnership, but my connection to what you're talking about is really timely because I staffed our Troy office for sales in 2000.
Okay.
And visited the Rensen daily.
Oh.
And there's a parking lot just north of Rensen that I used to park in every time I'd go there. And now it's part of your park and your riverwalk.
So you've experienced it firsthand. That's awesome.
Can't see me. I'm Fallon. I am staff support for the MLWP through the West Michigan Shoreline Regional Development Commission.
Nice to meet you.
And then we've got some folks on Zoom. We've got Jean.
Jean Wyrick, MLWP member and Shoreline Steward.
Nice to meet you.
Got Joanne.
I think Joanne said she couldn't talk.
Oh, okay,
today.
we'll come back. We have Max.
Yeah, hi, Max McKee, president of the Mart Dock. It's a downtown property on the waterfront.
Nice to
We
meet
have
you.
Dusty.
Hi, Dusty Taslar here. I'm the technical committee chair for the Watershed Partnership.
Right. And so just as an intro for Joanne, she's a new volunteer with us in the Watershed Partnership, very interested in birding and native planting. And then we have Kathy.
Hi, Kathy Evans. I've been with the Muskegon Lake Watershed Partnership since the beginning, and I want to thank John for all his help getting us off on the right foot many years ago when you were with the International Joint Commission coming to Muskegon Community College with Mark Breederlin and talking about what we needed to do to get things going. We had just established our public advisory councils for Muskegon Lake and White Lake areas of concern, and you gave us some fantastic advice then. We followed it, and I think we had some success. So I'm really happy that you're here to share with us now more of what we can do to bring people to the waterfront in this mode of life after delisting. We're not delisted yet, but we're close.
Great.
Wonderful.
Over here, one more person.
Oh, and Mark. We can't hear him, but that's Mark Evans, former treasurer and
I know Mark,
Kathy,
yeah.
I'm sure you know him. All right, so Jean looks like she had a specific question. She says, was there a feeling in the beginning that things were going so fast that it needed to slow down? And if so, how did things get slowed down for good learning together and reflection? Or did you, I'll add on to that, or did you have to just plow through anyway?
No, I think I hinted at this intentionally slowing the process down, because when we make a decision, have you factored in the desires and the aspirations and the dreams of the block clubs, the community groups, the churches, that to do, strategic communication and some of the design charrettes, that really slowed it. We had to slow down. And if we didn't, we would run the risk of, oh, it's just this bunch of few of you, this is what you wanted. We didn't really want that, So I think there's some real value in I know there's all this pent up energy to move quickly, but doing this right will pay long-term dividends in the process, and getting these groups on board is really important,
Absolutely. I also understand that you worked at one point later in the process with the Smith Group for those design shreds and some of the actual concepts for the Riverwalk. At what point did you bring them in?
Fairly early. We knew we had to, the nice thing about groups like Smith Group and Landscape Architects and Hamilton Anderson Association Associates is that they know how to, they're one of their fortes is not just landscape architecture, but community engagement. So they were really helpful to us in how to do this in a way, and in a way that would be lasting. And it was just really really helpful to have their input along the way as well.
I'm gonna go around the room this way. If anybody has a question that we haven't talked about quite yet, or anything specific they're curious about. You had a little short film done by PBS recently, so we sent that around to folks. If you guys haven't had a chance to watch it, it's a good overview of the Riverwalk story and so on. So do we have any questions in the room before I go back to the phones? Dennis.
Yeah, John, I don't know how it applies, friend, foe, or indifferent, but I know the Detroit Port Authority had a lot of influence on near shorelands, or for that matter, a lot of upland areas. Were they a partner in your endeavors, or were they opposition? Where did they stand?
Early on, you could imagine Detroit's had a working waterfront, right? Working waterfront that supported industry and commerce. And at first it was a little bit contentious, our primary mission is port operations, and bringing new business to Detroit. And here you want to make this public land, what about us? And so one of the things they wanted to do early on is, they were in an old building that was 110 years old and weren't, here they are, the Detroit Wayne County Port Authority, and they're not even on the water, So they wanted to have a presence to be able to tell their story about the St. Lawrence Seaway and commerce and what they do for this region, let alone the whole Great Lakes. And so through that, this dialogue process, they said, we really want to be on the waterfront, on the Riverwalk. And I said, how do we make that happen? And so one of our senators at the time, Senator Carl Levin, was able to get some funding to build a new Port Authority facility that looked to the future. This Port Authority facility would be something that would be valuable in the future when there is cruise ships coming. It would be valuable in the future when there's a cross-border ferry system again. So it'll have a wharf so you can dock the big cruise ships and the ferry boats there. And then there would have to be a customs and immigration place within the building. And so that is now a reality. That is on the Riverwalk in a very prominent location. They're a big champion of the Riverwalk. They now have a container, one of those steel containers out there on the Riverwalk that opens up during the day, and it has real time. See that freighter? That freighter's coming from location X. It's carrying this,
No, you can go on top of that, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you learn all about that in the St. Lawrence Seaway and what is the benefit of the Port Authority and the St. Lawrence Seaway. So, yeah, it was a little contentious up front, but we were able to turn it around. And yet, again, it's not going to be 1 or 2 years. It's a slow, methodical process, but they are truly a champion for us now.
Good, thank you.
How did you address kind of the liability issues and safety, right? Going from a working waterfront to a place where we're putting people right next to everything that's happening. Was there any particular issues that you ran into that were, you found good solutions for?
Yeah, liability. I mean, the water's edge, right? You're going to bring down, there's 3+ million people that visit the Detroit Riverwalk every year. What about kids? What about, how, you need some railings where you're going to do a softened edge with stone and plant material. What are you going to do to make sure kids don't get too adventurous and you've got a high flow river? You've got to think through all that. So yes, we had to go through that and work with all the proper authorities to think about that and work through solutions together on that. We also had numerous locations like Muskegon Lake where we had contaminated sediments. And the first time we submitted you need a permit to modify the shoreline, and it's a joint permit between U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and now Michigan Eagle. And we submitted it and they declined it. They said, you cannot do this. You have contaminated sediment in the river, even though you did not create the contaminated sediment project. We will not approve your project until that is addressed. So we have to go back to the drawing board, set us back several years. We had to, work with Great Lakes Legacy Act, which would give us 65% of the cost, then find other partners to make up the 35% non-federal. Huge challenge, but we've done that at Uniroyal and we're doing that at Ralph Wilson. We've got another one in the works now. We've had to do that at numerous places because of legacy pollution, just like Muskegon Lake.
Understood. I want to make sure that I'm not taking up too much time. Do we have anybody with questions? Max, Joanne, Dusty?
I have one more thought I would like to leave with you folks. And like when you're in a project, you're working on Muskegon Lake, you're going to focus tightly. What is our mission? How do we get this done and do a good job of it? But some people say, well, you got to keep thinking bigger. Think about 20 years from now. Think about the next generation, the generation that follows them. And so people are paying attention to the Detroit Riverwalk, and out of this has come a dialogue. Well, on the Canadian side of the Great Lakes, they have a Great Lakes waterfront trail. It starts on the St. Lawrence River at the Quebec-Ontario border, comes up the St. Lawrence, up the north shores of Lakes Ontario, Lakes Erie, goes through Detroit, Windsor, goes up around Lake St. Clair, up around Lake Huron, and all the way to the western end of Lake Superior. So they've had that now for 20 years. Why don't we have something like that? So we've kind of been brainstorming with the Council of State Governments. Should we have a mirror image of the Canadian Great Lakes Waterfront Trail in the United States that goes along the Great Lakes and around Lake Michigan, and then we work to find these points of crossing, like the Gordie Howe International Bridge, the Peace Bridge in Niagara Falls, and Cornwall Messina on the St. Lawrence River, different places where we could create these cross-border trail tourism experiences. So we're exploring that and together, and there is a lot of interest to do that. And of course, that trail would go right through Muskegon, and you would be part of that.
Right.
Count us in.
Sounds good. I might come back to you with that thought.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Go
have
ahead,
something
Kathy.
I kind of want to throw out there for maybe discussion, or thinking through at least. And it's that, like John said, this is a long-term effort. No matter where we're at in the process, the beginning, the middle, or getting closer to the end of what we can do on Muskegon Lake. We have a lakeshore trail. We have a lot of these different amenities and reasons to go to the lakeshore. We have a lot of places where we need to make improvements at some of our public access sites. The city of Muskegon is doing charrettes on that through their parks department. So, we're part of the Lakeshore Trail, which is part of the West Michigan Region Trail Network, and so I think we have a story we can start telling and some early successes that we can say that we have. So I guess I just want to throw it out there because maybe we should start thinking about our story, put it in a graphic format, a PowerPoint or whatever it takes, a video, and and maybe do a celebration of some sort with some of the success we have had with bringing public access to the natural resources of the lake, including the Lakeshore Trail, that's been in there for a while. And maybe it's not a new success, but maybe we need to remember that we do have to celebrate the successes we have had and have a story that we can start getting out there to people, not getting in front of people and the meaningful community engagement that we still need to do more of, but something for people to start feeling proud of, that we've done something and we're on our way towards something better.
Kathy, one of the things we've learned in our comms, communications team, they've said that the things that are most interesting to people are these short videos. Tell us a story, what you're doing in video form, 3 to 5 minutes, and it goes viral on YouTube and social media and everything else. But some of the early videos we did to talk about why we want to create this new waterfront porch were so instrumental. So I think that's a really good idea, Kathy, of doing that. And I have an idea for, you guys know Great Lakes Now. That's located out of Detroit and Detroit Public Television. I will talk to Kathy about, we could get a story about what you're doing, where you're at, and where you're going with this idea. Okay, we will talk about that in the weeks to come.
We would love to keep in touch for sure. And I think we're very open to any resources you're willing and able to share. I think that we are now in a transition phase. Really, as you mentioned, life after delisting, we're not fully delisted, but we do have to start imagining ourselves as, more of an outreach advocacy group versus, just trying to clean up the mess. So we're excited to move forward and really appreciate you joining us. Any last inquiries, comments, questions for John, who's welcome to hang out with us, but I want to make sure we go ahead.
One more.
Yeah.
I hope I won't open a can of worms, but I know initially GM was starting down this road before you even formed your group, but I know there was a lot of private property up and down the riverfront. Did your conservancy, your group, handle the acquisitions of those properties or negotiations to convert them over to public lands?
In some cases, yes, and in some cases, no. So in GM's case, GM still owns the GM Promenade, right?
Yeah.
They are the fee simple owner of it, but we co-manage it with them for programming and everything else. Same thing with the UAW GM Training Center, the largest training center in Michigan. It's right on the waterfront. They created a portion of the Detroit Riverwalk, and we manage it with them, on that. In some cases, we have purchased some of this land. So say with a Michigan Natural Resource Trust Fund grant or something like that. In some cases, we've got a 99-year lease to do this, with a interest in continuing that beyond 99 years. So the Riverfront Conservancy owns some land, but we also co-manage but do not own land as well.
Okay, that answers it. I just knew there had to be a lot of pushback from private property owners
Oh, yeah,
at the very beginning.
Yes, absolutely. You can imagine some of these industries, and we have some challenges. The last piece of the Riverwalk is going to be the Maroon property, it's called, at the Ambassador Bridge, and that's a very contentious situation for us, but we're in it for the long haul.
You have to utilize eminent domain in any case, or did you get around that with the various different leases and co-management agreements that you have?
Yeah, we have intentionally stayed away from eminent domain, and we have gone the soft route. If we can't buy it, can we get an easement, a conservation easement? If we can't get a conservation easement, can we do a 99-year lease? Can we, different tools in the toolbox, but the eminent domain would leave such a bad taste in so many people's mouths that we've tried to stay away from that.
Thank you.
I think that's a valid, yeah.
Because I'm trying to picture it. I know downtown Detroit, but I can't quite picture the waterfront either direction. Did it absorb any of what I assume is like all those giant unused factories that I think were somewhere near the waterfront? Did that kind of property have anything to do with it? And did it, what they were saying, did it impact residences that were near the waterfront, which is probably where your eminent domain thing is coming in?
Yeah, so in some cases, the Riverwalk is pretty narrow, 50, 60 feet, right, of waterfront. And then some cases we have Milliken State Park, and it's 20 some acres, and we've got Ralph Wilson Park and 20 some acres, but those abandoned factories, they are being repurposed now. By having the Riverwalk increase the value of that vacant land. And so you can imagine what a hot commodity some of those are, because you can live on the #1 Riverwalk in the United States. And all those factories that you saw in that one picture I showed you are in private hands and different kinds of development. Some of it is going to be, there are still a few industrial operations, small, like a machine shop down there and other things. There are some that are going into restaurants and bars, and some of them are going into housing. You know what I mean?
Do you think the Riverwalk would be possible if it was only run by, say, the city of Detroit? Do you think that we have been able to achieve this kind of scale on a municipal level?
That is a sensitive subject, because you can imagine if I were to answer that, I will answer it for you. But the city of Detroit, again, was the largest city in the United States to go through bankruptcy, and is the Riverfront Conservancy coming in and taking something from the residents of Detroit? And yet the city of Detroit at the time did not have the capacity to do this. The answer to that question was the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy build the capacity. With Matt Cullen, the co-chair was the deputy to the mayor, and city people were on the Riverfront Conservancy board. The city is woven through this. So that was a delicate dance to, we are not taking something away from the city. We are building the capacity. And then the big thing is, long-term, how are you going to operate, care for, maintain, program, and steward it in perpetuity with quality? So the Riverfront Conservancy now has a $40 million endowment to do that very thing. So as they are raising money to build the Riverwalk, they're raising money for an endowment to maintain it with quality in perpetuity. And so that, it's not gonna, like be neglected down the road.
Most wonderful. Jean is also excited for us to come visit and take a field trip. So, I'm always on board for that. So
I will give you a personal, I gave one last week. I'm happy to give a tour of that. And maybe there's a way Kathy will invite me out and I can come out and we can do some more of this kind of discussion in Muskegon in the future. Okay.
anytime.
Can I ask a-
Great.
One more question,
Absolutely.
Ken?
Yeah, question with regard to, did the city of Detroit, make any zoning changes or code of ordinance changes to facilitate, the development of the Riverfront Walk and ensure its, existence in perpetuity?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So we're trying to think ahead, like if you build this Riverwalk and this amazing resource, and then all these inland goes these businesses and condos and apartments and everything else. Could we do some tax increment financing? Could we say for each condo in that high rise, they're going to give whatever, $10 a month to a fund that helps operate, care, maintain, program, and steward the Riverwalk in perpetuity. So we are exploring that. You can imagine that new developers don't want that, but we're in it for the long haul. We're still trying to get some of that kind of thinking. How do we have a line item in the county budget and the city budget to help contribute to this long-term effort to do that?
And as a shared resource, right? And to get
It's a
folks
shared
to feel a
resource.
sense of ownership, for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So 7:09, we typically go here till 7:30 or so, just generally touching base. We're gonna pause